So welcome back to JC Law Podcast. Today we're going to do things just a little bit differently. I have a special guest on, the founder of the firm, James Crawford. I'm going to pick his brain about sex offenses and child pornography cases, something that he specialized in throughout his career. So without further ado, here's James Crawford. How you doing?
Pete, how are you?
Good. Mr. Crawford, how are you?
Good. Mr. Crawford. Well, I understand we're going to talk about some specific items today.
Yeah, I thought we could talk about the process of these cases, where they start, where they end up, some of the wrinkles along the way, and just kind of pick your brain about your experience with these cases.
Well, I have to say that if you're dealing with sex offense cases, it's a wide variety of types of cases. Could include fourth degree sex offense, third degree sex offense. It could be rape. It could be a touching. It could be a solicitation, prostitution, assignation, or really we categorize sex offense cases as CP case, child pornography cases as well. Mm-hmm. And those cases can also morph into other types of cases, Senate cases, child abuse type cases, and mm-hmm. things like that, and even stretches to the obscenity statutes. So it's a wide variety of different types of statutes and crimes that have been developed over centuries, so to speak.
Yeah, it's also affected a lot of custody cases, divorce cases. I know the criminal department has worked closely with the domestic department in this area, just because obviously once somebody's charged, it might affect custody or it might affect the marriage itself. You can believe that it'd be shocking to a spouse to find this out. So
well, it happens all the time. I have to say that from doing this for 33 years and handling a lot of federal district court type cases and state cases, that these type of cases are usually the most shocking type cases from the standpoint that they rock the family system. In other words, it devastates families. It's one of the largest hidden types of secrets out there that permeate society. Mm-hmm. And of course, as you probably know from my writings and my last book, I've always looked at some of the underlying root causes, and I believe it's pornography. And as you know, I'm not an anti-pornography guy. We represent people who produce that First Amendment type scenarios. Absolutely. But there's no question that pornography has caused and wreaked major havoc in society. Mm-hmm. Now the real question is, does the pornography escalate and cause any sex offense crimes? There's studies done. I believe that there's no question that pornography escalates and causes a dopamine feature release that may cause individuals to look at things that they normally would not do. Regarding sex offense cases, that's a different story.
I think you've talked to me about that just a little bit, how somebody gets a dopamine release, and then once they look at the same image or the same thing, they can't get the same release. So then they look into something even more extreme to get that same release, and that's how the rabbit hole, the tunnel kind of goes. It's
pretty simple, the science says that it's not just with pornography. Mm-hmm. Pornography has hundreds, thousands of years of history. Pornography may have been a drawing on a cave wall, right? Or one of the most famous books written in the 17th century. Fannie Mae basically was one of the first books that kind of talked about erotic scenes. Mm-hmm. And so it's escalated and it's changed, and there's a really detailed history in this country about what pornography means. And it also translates into the obscenity thought process, because most pornography for many years, not just in this country, but across the world, was illegal. So hence obscenity. And so it morphed out of the obscenity statutes into the modern day pornography statute. So what you're saying, there's a book written about 6 years ago. It's called Your Brain on Porn. One of the first books that really outlines the dopamine feature and all the other features about how it can actually change the brain mapping of a male's brain about how they approach and how they think about sex, about how they think about visual images. And it's a good book. It's changed a lot of people's lives. It's the first book that actually gave credibility to the psychiatry societies that basically now label it as an actual disorder.
Really?
Yeah, it's actually labeled as a disorder now, depending upon what society you're talking about, but the American Psychiatric Society has really recognized that very much like gambling. And although it has not fully reached the potential it can reach, there are diagnoses listed as dependency upon pornography, and there's actually prescriptions and what have you. But pornography itself is insidious. It's caused major problems in relationships, and it's usually a symptom of some other things going on. But our society tends to think that pornography is okay, and and some people it does not affect the way that it affects other people.
To some degree, I tend to agree with them, just because, at least for me, there's two categories that I put pornography in. Number one, my personal category, my personal beliefs on how it affects people within society, but also my lawyer had the First Amendment coming into play, and the ability for people to express themselves through pornography, or just the freedom of expression to be protected to begin with. So personally, I agree with you, but from a legal standpoint, I do agree that the First Amendment should come into play with this pornography videos and pictures.
Well, 100%, and that's where you get into the obscenity thought process of statute. Larry Flint versus the United States, a very famous Supreme Court case, dealt with that in a big way in the 1970s and helped define what pornography is versus the First Amendment. There's certain limits that the First Amendment has. Everyone thinks that freedom of speech is completely unlimited. It's not. When it crosses over into the barrier affecting other people's lives or causing harm in a general way to society, the Supreme Court has said about pornography, you know it when you see it.
Right.
And that's the overall thought process even today.
So where's that line, though, of that harm? Because like you said, there's obvious categories like child pornography is obviously excluded under the First Amendment. That's not protected by the First Amendment. That's not free speech.
Right.
But do you think if we can show a causal link between pornography and the destruction of men's mind or women's minds within society, then that'd be a ground to prohibit it within society?
I think that's an interesting argument. I think the problem is that it takes a lot to overcome that. Just like any other vice in our society, alcohol, drugs, our society is going towards a different direction, legalizing marijuana, legalizing other type of drugs, free use of, even hallucinogenics. So I doubt that the courts will be inclined to say that, well, because it causes harm, therefore it encroaches upon someone's right or not right for his First Amendment. And it's doubtful that it's going that way. The decisions on those areas have remained pretty steady over the last 15 years. They haven't been expansive, but they've remained pretty steady. And even as, I should say, the pornography industry has morphed and changed around the world in a dramatic way.
How have those changes been seen within society? Or what are those changes, and then how has it affected society?
I tell you, I think that I was shocked. This is about 3 years ago, where I saw an image of a particular porn site, Pornhub, on a billboard in Times Square, New York, and it was right there advertising as if it was like Coca-Cola or some other type of product. So the normalization of pornography is obviously what the advertisers and what the pornography industrialists want us to do. The problem is that it still causes harm, and what I've seen and what I've devoted decades to is the understanding about how that drives individuals in their thought processes, their their illusions, and even what they do regarding particular crimes. So CP is a big part of that.
So let's say they do it. They watch pornography. They see the billboard in Times Square. They decide, okay, I'm going to go to Pornhub. They go through this elaborate. They create a habit of watching.
Right.
It takes them down a rabbit hole that's a little bit dark, and then they eventually get a knock at 4 o'clock in the morning by the police saying, "You've done something." How does that process go?
Well, it's the process is daunting, and it depends on what area of the country you're talking about. But many areas of the country have developed sheriff's departments, particular squads in police departments. On the federal level, the FBI, Secret Service, even other agencies have basically developed units to assist in attacking CP. Now, interesting enough, it's pretty obvious, is that years ago when the computer became prevalent, all of a sudden pornography exploded. And it was obviously different. Pornography was different before that, and in that it was in magazines and things like that. Interesting enough, obviously I'm not going to name any names or clients, but I had a client years ago who had kind of grown up with pornography and was an elderly fellow, had never committed any other crime in his life. And his father used to take him to Times Square, New York, talking about like in the 60s and 70s. And they would go into, Times Square was known at that time as a very, a dirty book type scenario, and a lot of strip clubs and things like that. And they would go in and look at these magazines. The father, he would wait for his father, but he noticed there was actually CP in some of these magazine stores in the magazine. So people looked at that then in a different way. And then you would also, you could get it through U.S. mail or what have you. But when the United States Congress passed several laws, primarily dealing with pornography and computers, it changed everything, because it gave the federal government and even the state governments the ability to regulate and to prosecute based upon possession of pornography, manufacturing of pornography, on the federal level, receipt of pornography, and distribution. Most states do not have the crime of receipt. It's usually the other three. So when they developed those tactics, what had to happen is the agents, and also on the state level, the FBI would assist state officials. They would search for these computers that contained CP on the hard drive. And the biggest way they did that for years was something called BitTorrent programs. And what that meant was, there's about 15 of them out there, and I'm not going to name the specific name, although I can name one, Ari's, where basically you would hunt for any type of video or any type of music that you wanted to look for. But the kicker was that all that information was on an individual's hard drive. So for example, if you signed up for it, you would agree in the very beginning by downloading the material or downloading the app, that they would allow you to keep all these video and all these products on your hard drive, so other people could then come and look at your hard drive and retrieve what they were searching. So in essence, when you searched on a BitTorrent program, you're searching millions of hard drives, for lack of a better description. And so that's how the police would actually go out and hunt for people that had CPU on their computer. They would do it all day long. They would track people.
So I think I can kind of see where the issue is going to go, because obviously the initial issue of having the pornography, searching for the pornography, but then with these BitTorrent programs, you actually store it on your computer, which then can be searched by other people. So at that point, does it become distribution?
Well, that's a great question, and I've argued that up and down many, many times to federal judges and state judges. It's a fine line. So with the BitTorrent programs, there's a lot of defenses to that. One of the defenses is simply that if you put a search in for a particular type of request, like it could be a request for pornography, young, use the word young, or teen, or something to that effect, you may get all kinds of torrents back because it's not defined that well. So you may get perfectly legal pornography back from other hard drives. You may get some illegal pornography back. So what happens is generally the law says, okay, that you're responsible for that. In other words, if you're downloading something, generally, there's defenses to it, but in general fashion, you're responsible for what you're downloading. And so the downloading itself on a state level is not distribution. It may be distribution from the other person sending it to you. On a federal level, it may be a receipt. And it's certainly not production or distribution. Now, the problem is that as soon as it goes to your computer, it's going to go to other people's computer. And inevitably to a detective or an agent who is going to download it and basically show that you're now distributing that CP, not just simply possessing it. And needless to say, on a federal level, distribution is a 10-year statutory crime, and simple possession could be a 5-year mandatory crime. Most states do not have, a statutory requirement time for these statutes, although it's starting to change. So the fairness was really disparate. If one person is charged on a federal level, they may be doing 10, 15 years in jail. On a state level, if I represent them, they may be walking out and maybe even eventually having that crime taken off the record at some point in time. So big difference.
So at sentencing, obviously mitigating factors are factors that somebody will argue in order to mitigate the sentence of somebody's crime.
Right.
You said that this was a huge disparity in what people were sentenced to. What did you think, or what did you see as the biggest mitigating factors that would kind of cause the judge back of his mind to say, okay, this person's addicted to pornography. This is more of an issue that needs to be fixed rather than a penalty of locking somebody up?
Well, first of all, 10 years ago when I stood in front of judges and said, Judge, this type of action taken by an individual is really indicative of an addictive feature. It has addictive features. The judges most of them would just primarily dismiss it. So when you're talking about arguing for someone on a federal level or a state level for mitigating type scenarios, there's a lot of things we can do. The first thing I usually do is I have someone evaluated, because generally I would say about 80% of the time, most of the people that are arrested and charged with child pornography are people that have never had any criminal activity in their life. Generally, the studies show, and some people would disagree with me about it, but I respectfully disagree with them, because the studies show this, that they would generally not act out and try to do actual physical harm to a child. Now, there's exceptions. There's people that just have a propensity to want to do that physically to a child and harm a child. But generally, the people that are caught with that are people that are educated, who have families, who have no prior criminal history, and usually job focused. And so one of the things I've done is I actually have these individuals evaluated by instructors and people that usually do a good job. And the question is, number one, do they have any propensity to do any harm to society as far as actually acting out and touching another individual, a child, or what have you? The majority is usually deemed to not. There's exceptions, as I said, but generally they're not. And then there's all kinds of other mitigating circumstances. The feature, the number one feature that I think is really, really interesting is that when people look at pornography, you got to understand the history of this. When I was a teenager, most guys had Penthouse, or they had Playboy, or maybe it might be a dirty movie of some sort, but very, very few was accessible to the general public. So as time went on, and one of the most outstanding things that occurred to change our society with pornography is the video of real time showing sexual acts as if you're right there. Because you have to remember the physical studies show that when a male looks at that visually, although intellectually a male knows that it's not real, at least that's not in front of them, but all the brain functions that kick in the sexual functions act as if they're real.
All the synapses are just firing at the same time.
Everything. The dopamine's released, then the spinal cord, an erection occurs, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is done over and over again. This is why you would see one of the questions I would ask some of my clients is kind of personal, but I would discuss this with them at some level, usually because the therapist would, is that they had erectile dysfunction on them because they had the portion of the brain that knew how to have sex wasn't functioning. The wires weren't out there. They would have to look at many, many images to identify with how they were supposed to have sex. And so, but the interesting thing about it is, Pete, is that the majority of the time when people stayed away, the brain would heal, so to speak, and those brain connections would dissipate and things would go back to normal in the majority of ways. It's very much like if you're going to be a baseball player and you learn how to bat left-handed and you're doing it every day, and you're getting pretty proficient at it, your brain's allowing you to do that. If you step away for a couple months, you're not going to step back and use that, well, you won't be as effective.
We actually talked about that with Mark, how sometimes when the client gets arrested, it's the best day of their life because now they come to a lawyer like you or to like Mark who can then correct the action and they can begin to heal within their life. And obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it because it's not just them healing, they have victims, right? And it's not just, even if they don't touch somebody, there's still the argument and the reality that they're facilitating an industry that is harmful to children. So obviously that's a very real reality, but at the same time, like I said, at least for the client, it is the best day of their life because they can come in and start fixing and rehabilitating their issues.
Well, that's interesting. I can tell you right now, many times, many federal prosecutors and state prosecutors and I got into major knockdown arguments because it's my belief that a mere user of pornography is generally not facilitating the production of pornography. That's just a fallacy. It just is. And it's not because of them that the pornography industry exists. That's a whole other discussion. But suffice it to say, that's not how porn people make their money. Now, people who are producing child pornography, as terrible as it is, usually do that for a different type of profit system. Now, when somebody is arrested for this, as you said, usually get a knock on the door about 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and these agents and these detectives, who I've known many throughout the years, are very good at what they do because they come in, everybody's sleeping or getting ready for work or school, and they basically separate people. It's usually focused on the male in the family, usually the father or the husband, but not always. And they separate everyone, they go after the electronic devices, and they scare the hell out of people. And they basically have people sit down and they befriend them, and they talk to them, they take them out to the car, and they will record them and get them to admit that that is their device, because CP, 90% of the case is possession of the electronic device, okay? Because it's not that easy to get that information into evidence on the state or the government's behalf. So possession of the electronic device is a big, big deal. And that's what the detectives are trying to do. Hey, Mr. Crawford, is this your laptop? Okay, well, we found we did a cursory search, we found CP on there. Did you intentionally do this? Many people will admit it. Some people will say, I don't want to talk about it. It just depends. But, some of these police officers will threaten people, say they're going to lock up other people in the family if you don't admit to it because they don't know who actually committed the crime. Most of it's bullcrap, but that's what they do. Now, as far as being the best day of their life, I have to tell you that that's not something that most of them feel like that day.
Right.
And you know that, unfortunately, I'll just be honest. I mean, this is one of the most devastating areas of law in our society from a standpoint that people kill themselves. People will kill themselves. They think that their life is over. A lot of times it is so revolting to society. It's so revolting, the initial shock of it, that wives and husbands, family members will completely shun someone who is going through a process that is not good, but it is something that happens to millions of people. And yes, could it be the best day of their life? This is the way I couch it with people. And I don't mind saying I've been very, very successful in this arena. This is, in my opinion, we're one of the most successful firms in the country regarding this type of thing because we have a lot of unusual thought processes about how we do this. One of the things I tell people is that obviously your life as you know it is no longer going to happen. Your life is going to change. But when I put them in a position and say, I want you to read this book tonight, I want you to read it tonight, and I want you to go to that website, although they usually take their electronics, but still want them to go to a website. That's a different discussion because I usually don't want them on the web usually, but they can learn so much. And when they understand, and of course this isn't across the board, but this is, I'd say about 70% of the people charged. When they understand how they put themselves in this stupid position where they mistakenly thought that looking at this dopamine feature type of scenario is sexual desire, then they totally think, okay, now I understand how stupid I am, how this has happened. Now, I'm not saying they're blameless. Everybody has a choice in society. We all do what we do, and that's a whole other discussion. But we're defense lawyers, okay, and we're here to try to defend people that have been accused of committing crimes. The way I first look at these cases is, let the government and the state prove their case. That's the way I look at it first. And as it has morphed out of the BitTorrent realm over the years, now it's morphed into things like, Facebook and other type of apps that are very, very popular. Some have chat rooms in them. Some are just basic, social media apps where they are locating and putting some of these things.
So is it more post or is it more direct messages back and forth between individuals?
The majority of the CP cases are people that are going online and are searching. Now, again, I'm not a physician, but I've pretended to be one in the courtroom, so to speak, for many years. Okay,
Right.
And it's very interesting because it is an escalation feature. Okay, meaning that the brain, the basic thought process of the male brain is males want to propagate, males want to have sex, but some of the testing that's been done over the years, a very basic test that was done in the 50s and 60s, is called the Coolidge test. And basically it was done with rats, and it had a rat. Now, I guess you could say we're not rats, but I mean, this is what it is, silly enough. But they would put a rat in with a male and female. The male would mate several times with the female rat and would be totally exhausted and would not be interested in having any more type of connection with that rat. Interesting enough, okay, if you put another female rat in the cage, took the old one out, that male rat would quickly become interested in that whole process all over again.
So is that monogamy? Is that more about how people within society shouldn't be married to one monogamous partner because?
Well, I'm not going to get into that. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. But my point is with this with the Coolidge effect, is that this is what causes the dopamine feature. So the dopamine in the rat for the first female waned after a period of time. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying this is scientific testing, and that doesn't mean you do it.
I got you. So it's more about seeing the video, seeing the initial video, the second video, the third video. Is that how they get the release of dopamine over and over?
Yeah, and people go down the line, and that's why a lot of, first of all, listen, computers in our society today, many people, young people and older people, get lost in computers. Their whole life is in a computer.
Mm-hmm.
So they come home and their whole evening spend on computers. So they start looking at pornography in the evening. Next thing you know, 2, 3, 4 hours go by.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically it's called escalation from the standpoint that an individual will look at a film and they will jump until they find something that is really stimulating. Now, here's a really telltale sign of what I'm talking about is true. If you go to, and I'm not recommending anybody do it, but if you go to any type of porn site, commercial porn site, you will see all kinds of generic, all kinds of crazy type thoughts. Big, small, fat, upside down, hanging on chandeliers, straight, gay, whatever. And so what that means is that these pornographers, they understand this process beautifully. They understand escalation. It's very much like keeping you. How would you like to be able to sell one product and people keep coming back over and over and over again?
It's hacking the human brain, essentially. It's what it is.
It really is.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens. So that escalation feature. Now, one of the things I'll say is this as well. Many people will do that. Many males who are caught with this stuff, because of the rush and the dopamine release and other chemical release, because you know it's wrong. It's forbidden. That forbidden, and then when you add sexual activity into the equation, look, I don't think anybody, there's been studies for decades and forever about human sexuality, but nobody really understands human sexuality completely. Mm-hmm. So when you combine these features with human sexuality, all kinds of crazy stuff happens. Now, so the point is that, is it their best day of their life? It could be. They don't look at it that way because generally their life is over. I will say this, that I've had many people in a situation that have followed our lead, and it takes time and some luck. We create the luck in many ways, but it depends upon where it is, what county, what state, what government, federal, what have you, where I can put people in a situation where they go through some pain for a period of time and eventually get it off the record. You know what, one of the most interesting things and most successful things that my clients, and I'm talking about a lot, have done as compared to the clients that are not successful?
What?
The ones who are successful are the ones that take the bull by the horn and understand what happened to them and own it. And as a matter of fact, I've had more than several handfuls of clients that afterwards have gone out and actually spoken to groups of people about what that did to them, how it almost ruined their life, and how that put them in a situation of, like, except for God's mercy, they were in a position of like almost death. I've had people who are some of the most wealthiest people in the country, in the state of Maryland, people who are on board of directors, many politicians, athletes, and they all ask one similar question, that is, how did I get myself in this position? When they know that and they take control of it, generally good things happen.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.